Hello, this is Grandmaster Damien Lemos with William Stewart for OnlineChessLessons.net. In this video we are going to cover the Nimzo-Indian defense. First we are going to do an introduction to analyze basics of this defense, right? Not only variations, but to show the main ideas behind this defense. And then in chapter 1 we are going to cover Queen C2, which is the Capablanca variation. White in this case, he's ready to retake on C3 with the queen, so the pawn structure is not destroyed. The chapter 2 we are going to analyze E3, which is the Rubinstein variation. In this case, White wants to play Bishop D3 and Knight G2. He can play Knight G2 immediately as well to connect knights and stop Bishop takes C3. He can also play Knight F3. This is more a positional line as well, and together with Queen C2, they are, I think, the most popular ones. Then in chapter 3 we're gonna see alternatives like F3, which is an aggressive line, and F3 is not a development move, but White wants to get a strong center by playing E4. And
that's a very interesting line that's been played quite heavily by Alexei Shirov, so it's going to lead to some fireworks, and we definitely try to cover how Black is able to successfully navigate his way through the crazy jungle of the F3 line to achieve a very solid position in the opening.
And the other move we are covering, for instance, is Bishop G5, where White wants to play like the Queen's Gambit, and he wants to continue with E3, right? And he wants to develop the bishop before playing E3, so the bishop is outside the pawn chain.
Okay, so basically the purpose of the DVD here is going to target a beginner and intermediate level audience, and with some familiarity of the opening. But what we're really trying to do here, we're not going to be focusing on the most complex lines that the top super grandmasters are playing today. What we're really trying to focus on is providing a reliable weapon for your opening repertoire. We're going to focus mostly on the concepts, the main ideas, the fundamentals of the Nimzo-Indian defense, and how you're going to be able to employ these successfully after this relatively short 2-hour DVD here. Again, we want to emphasize more than anything that learning openings, let's say until you reach 2300, you don't really need to focus so much on memorizing the move orders. We're going to really focus on the reasons behind the moves and trying to convey this understanding through this DVD, so that you're going to be able to employ the Nimzo-Indian defense with success at the beginner and intermediate level without dedicating dozens of hours of your life to memorizing all those little tiny variations.
And that's why we like the Nimzo-Indian, because we don't need to know much theory, but understanding the ideas behind it, it's much more important, right? Because it's kind of a closed opening. Okay, so we're going to start with the introduction to the Nimzo-Indian defense. Here we are going to see the main ideas in this opening. After D4, Knight F6, C4, E6, Knight C3, Bishop B4. Now we're gonna see some variations to show Black's ideas, right? Not only specific variations, we're gonna do that in the chapters. So in this example, White plays A3, which is not a great move, right? Because White is trying to push our bishop back, but our idea is to take the knight on C3 anyway. So A3 is like a waste of tempo, right? Bishop takes C3, and after bishop takes C3, we are also destroying his pawn structure. So bishop takes, pawn takes. We play B6 here, and this is interesting. We know that in Nimzo-Indian, once we give this bishop up, bishop F8, and then we have to place our pawns in dark squares. So our bishop C8, it's a great one. Otherwise, if we play something like D5, C6, then the bishop on C8, it's a very bad bishop, right? Because our pawns are placed in same squares. So here black plays b6 before castling, but let's see why. Once we take on c3, now especially the c4 pawn becomes so weak, and our idea is to attack it. We can try playing bishop a6, then something like knight to c6, knight a5, and as we're gonna see in the future chapters, there's another plan like knight to e8 and knight to d6. So here white plays e3, and now we can also see that the bishop on c1 it's like inside the pawn chain, and that bishop won't play much. We play bishop a6 here, putting pressure on c4, bishop to d3, and knight to c6. See, black is not castling yet. There's no rush actually. Looks like a close position, so I mean, and we are up in development as well.
So this is a really nice example of what can happen if white is not playing a specific system against the Nimzo-Indian, right? I mean, here it kind of seems like white is just kind of making it up as he goes, playing the early a3 move, which is definitely not a good idea. This move that really just makes black capture the knight on c3 and double the pawns is something black really wants to do anyway in this opening. It's a big theme in the Nimzo-Indian, trying to create these weak double pawns. And this is going to be a really nice example of just the real traditional way that black is going to be able to go after the doubled pawns, especially the pawn on c4. That's the pawn we really want to go after. And we can see that with the natural way to attack this pawn is going to be the bishop on a6, bringing the knight to c6 into a5, where the pawn on c4 is just going to be a sitting duck. There's really no need for black to go ahead and castle just yet. I mean, the center is very closed. There's no danger against black's king. So why not capitalize and make every move at a high premium in the opening?
So here, white plays knight to f3. Well, looks like a development move, so should be fine. Now we play knight to a5. Again, see, we are not castling yet, but we are making sure all our pieces go where they belong to. And now queen a4.
So well, queen a4
looks like a weird way of defending c4, right? I mean, perhaps queen e2 looks more natural, although I think if he plays queen e2, we can still play same way, like we are gonna play here. And as we'll see, black, he won't try to take this pawn. I mean, if white undoubles these c pawns, we can still get a very good position, and that's what we want to show here. After castling, white castles as well. We play d5.
So d5 is a move you're not always going to be looking to make in the Nimzo, but in this particular case it's very effective because the bishop on d3 is undefended. The bishop on a6 is pinning the c4 pawn, so trying to pile up on that really does make a lot of sense here.
So right, here white plays knight to e5, defending the c4 pawn.
And the bishop on d3.
Right.
So it looks like he's got everything is covered here, maybe a little bit loosely, but black's next move is a great way to exploit this early queen to a4 move.
Right, and black plays the queen to e8. Basically, we want to remove the best defender of the c4 pawn, and I think that queen a4 together with knight e5, those are white's most active pieces, right? So it's a great idea to trade your opponent's best pieces. After queen e8, well, white has to take, rook f takes e8, and now unless, he wants to give up the c4 pawn, he has to take on d5, c takes d5, bishop takes d3, and here white has to take the bishop. If he takes on e6, looks like a nice in-between move, then bishop c4 is enough for winning. We defend the f7 pawn, we keep our extra piece. White has to take the bishop, And here, well, we have two ways of retaking on d5. I think we should retake with the pawn.
Right, this is very important. So, I mean, if you're going to capture with the knight here...
It's a very big difference, right?
Yeah, I mean, this would be a huge mistake because it's almost inevitable that white is now going to be able to make a couple of liberating moves like e4 or c4, in which case white is going to be taking over the center, pushing black back, and I think most importantly, white is going to be able to get his bishop out to an active position. But after we take with a pawn here, even though material is equal, black has such an incredible positional advantage because his knights are just going to dominate the board on e4 and c4.
Right, so now we're going to see another great example, but yeah, as Will said, I think this line is showing that, for instance, d5 is not a move we always have to play in Nimzo, because actually we are undoubling white's pawns, right? But in this case, we are taking white's best bishop on d3, and bishop c1 looks like a tall pawn in the previous variation, right?
So here, yeah. Why don't we just take a quick look at maybe what could happen instead of white playing queen to a4 in the opening if he plays a better try with queen to e2.
Right.
We're going to see the attacking pattern is pretty similar. I just wanted to introduce a couple of common themes as well. A lot of times black is going to be able to play moves like d6, queen to d7, queen to a4. So just to give a sample line, let's say black really starts going after it. Maybe white is trying to pile up in the center. And we're going to see black really just establish such a very strong focal point with a pawn on c4. And a lot of times even continuing by playing pawn to c5, rook to c8. So let's say something like rook to c8 in this position. And just as an example, we're going to see that black is threatening something like c takes d4. And really just almost every single piece by black is going to pile up on the c4 pawn.
Alright, so now let's see another example. After d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4. Now white plays a natural move, which is knight to f3. And here black plays bishop takes c3. Well, bishop takes c3. Looks like there's no rush to take there. But, you know, I started looking at this move since I saw an Ivanchuk's game, and okay, I mean, yeah, usually we have to wait till white pushes that bishop back with a3, but it's not a bad idea to take the knight on c3, in my opinion, because then we are making sure we destroy white's pawn structure. So
it's nice to have that guarantee. You know, there's a lot of lines like the Capablanca variation we're going to cover, where in that line white actually just plays the immediate queen c2. But let's say if knight f3, maybe if we just castle, and now maybe white is going to be able to play a move like queen c2, and you know it's kind of nice to just go ahead and snatch the knight and make sure we're gonna double the pawns and inflict that permanent positional damage.
I agree, and you know, we make sure we are gonna play our setup. I mean, I actually love playing against these double pawns, so like Will says, there's no need to give white the chance of playing queen c2, right? Or bishop d2. If he played knight f3, we can actually take, and then he cannot push like f3 and e4 since he played knight f3 already. So, okay, after b takes, black plays b6 first. Looks interesting. Again, there's no rush to castle that quickly. Bishop g5, bishop b7.
So I think the bishop g5 move here is much better in this example than as white had played in the previous example with the early e3. You know, just it's really nice for white to go ahead and get that bishop out. It's going to pressure black's knight on f6, which is definitely one of black's best pieces, as it really has a nice grip on e4.
So now white plays e3, and yeah, once he plays bishop g5, now it's like the bishop, it's outside the pawn chain, right? Otherwise, like the previous example, the bishop on c1 was so useless there, right?
I think we should also point out maybe an important difference here with the bishop on g5 is that if we continue with bishop to a6, like in the previous example, white might be able to play e4. He's going to have a massive pawn center then.
Right, absolutely. And then, yeah, we have to deal with, yeah, the bishop pair, right? We don't have much development. I think, like Will says, yeah, in this example and the previous one as well, we were controlling the e4 square so well, white couldn't create any counterplay. So
Yeah.
right,
So
that's
that's-
why we play bishop b7 here, right?
Yeah.
Stopping the e4 move. Yeah. So e3, h6, always a useful move for black. Obviously attacking the bishop, but, you know, creating some luft or air in case we castle.
I think also this is very useful to play h6 very early on against the bishop g5 move to put the question to the bishop. White very rarely is going to capture your knight, just giving you that dark squared bishop for free there. This is really easy to play for black. And the advantage that after white goes backwards is that later in the game, let's say when things start heating up tactically, we can just lash out instantly with g5 to break the pin. And white's not going to have any way, you know, he's going to be forced to go back.
So here after h6, bishop to h4, black plays d6, makes sense. We prepare knight b d7 as well, and like Will said, c5 it's an option, and I think we'll have to play it because we win space at kingside, right? And it's kind of a close position. We can afford making a move like c5. We are not creating so many weaknesses actually.
Also, this b6 move, just to elaborate a little bit, Damien had mentioned this a little earlier, you know, we've got a light squared bishop, and that means we want to put our pawns on dark squares so that our bishop is going to be able to work with those pawns and control the squares that the pawns did not.
So after d6, white plays the bishop to d3, then c5, bishop c3, knight b d7, makes sense.
I think black maybe could have waited a move or two to play g5 in this example, but honestly, I don't see the harm in just go ahead and playing it right now.
So he castles here, queen e7, another nice move. Then probably, if I had to choose a side to castle here, I would choose, you know, queen side. I think the king is safe there, especially because I can try to attack at king side then. So I like queen e7. Okay, white plays knight to d2.
It's a nice idea for white.
Looks like, yeah, he wants to play e4. But now we play h5 before castling again. See that the king on e8 looks safe, right? As we are talking about such a close position, our king is not in danger. So we play h5, and now white plays h4. Looks like the easiest way of, you know, getting rid of the threat. But
so here black has, you know, I always try to really preach the candidate moves method. And so, you know, with candidate moves, we start by trying to identify all the possible moves. We start by analyzing the most forcing moves, starting with checks, captures, and generally forcing moves. In this position, I think we have three basic candidate moves. Pawn takes h4, push to g4, or we can simply defend the pawn on g5. And pushing the pawn to g4, first of all, I think this would be a huge positional mistake. I mean, black is trying to attack on the king side, and by pushing the pawn to g4, he's fixing the pawns. They're all closed, and basically he's closing his own counterplay.
it's like white can breathe again there, right after c4.
He's got nothing to worry about.
Right.
And taking the pawn on h4, I mean, really there's no need to initiate this exchange. It really just helps white, you know, kind of blockade the position. Now the bishops jump back onto an active diagonal. It really just seems to help white. So I really like the move in the game. It was rook to g8 here.
Exactly, and then it's like our threat taken on h4, it's stronger, right? Previously it wasn't that much, but now after rook g8, there's also a threat at the g2 pawn. So I think this is a great move. I mean, we can play this later.
Yeah, the pressure against g2. I mean, now black is starting to make, you know, aside from having a very solid position, I think a good long-term positional advantage as well, due to white's doubled c-pawns, black is also now starting to make concrete threats on the g-file.
Now white plays e4, which looks like, yeah, the best way of, you know, stopping bishop e7. Here black castles here, makes sense. white, yeah, takes on c5.
So taking on g5 is certainly a logical move. What do you think would happen if white tried to play e5 here? You know, this is always a critical move in these types of situations, especially white, you know, as very common in the Nimzo-Indian, white has the two bishops. So it's naturally going to benefit white to open the position up and especially, you know, gain space by pushing the pawn to e5. But it looks like here there's a couple of tactical refutations, right?
Basically, after e5, yeah, white is opening the bishop b7 diagonal. So I think we have two candidate moves here. One of them being g5 takes h4. I mean, we have to consider that one because then rook takes g2. It's coming. And the other one, which is, yeah, quite great looking, is d takes e5 and knight takes e5 as well, right? The bishop on d3 is falling.
Yeah, that bishop.
Like we have so many. Yeah, here it's like black can choose, right, what to play.
Yeah, it's not an appropriate combination for white to play e5.
And yeah,
the line that Damien was referring to also before was e5, g takes h4, and if the bishop is stuck, right? Let's say he takes the knight, maybe we just bring the other knight over, and now the bishop is completely stuck, and we're going to be
so dangerous, right?
Yeah, going too hard here.
So here white takes on c5, but this is risky as well, right? Rook takes c5. We don't have the bishop pairs black here, but we have a lot of attacking chances on the c file, and the bishop on b7, it's really great. So white plays knight to f3. I like this rook c4, winning a tempo, knight to h2, and rook to c7. Now we are ready to double up rooks there. So bishop to h4. White is defending decently, right? I mean, bishop h4, he wants to play c3 next, and then his king looks solid. And like Will said, e5 one day, who knows, right? Especially now after bishop h4 would make more sense. So rook d c8, after c3, here black finds a very nice variation, which is knight takes e4.
So this looks completely crazy. I mean, black is giving away his queen for a pawn.
Right, but you know, this tactic, it's working because we had a very nice attack and development, right? I mean, this is not magic. It's working because we played great moves before, right?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about the position, you know, black is the one who's been dictating the course of play for quite a while now. He's been playing a lot of forcing moves. He's had a very straightforward plan, whereas white, you know, he's kind of been going back and forth. You know, he brought the knight to d2. Okay, he did play e4 with that. Now he brought the knight back to f3 and back to h2. Looks like it's kind of trying to defend, but it's kind of a weird place to defend. And the bishop on h4 is kind of weird too. And playing g3, we can also see that maybe in the future that would open up the that h1 to a8 diagonal. So I think with all these factors, you know, when you start seeing that you're controlling the play, you're pressing for the advantage, then we need to start trying to think a little bit outside of the box, looking for some crazy type of combination.
So if knight takes e4, white can take the queen, and he can also take the knight on e4. If he takes the knight on e4, then we can simply go queen takes h4, and probably in the future rook takes c3 as well, and we have a lot of mating attacks, right? And if he takes the queen, we play rook takes c3, white has to retake, then rook takes again, and then after king h1 we have knight f2, which is mate. And I like this example because we were successful in our attack, in our middle game plan, but white didn't play badly, right? The thing is, like Will said, we were like dictating the course of the game since the beginning, right? I mean, we had the initiative, we were attacking with c5, h5. Once we took the initiative at the beginning, then we were successful. So now we know some plans like this knight to e8, knight d6, bishop a6, knight c6, and knight a5, the first example we saw. Now I think we are ready to jump into the chapters. So we're going to start with chapter 1 in the Nimzo. After d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, and bishop b4. The move we are going to analyze in this chapter, chapter 1, it's queen c2, which is called the Capablanca variation. And when white plays queen c2, his idea is, he's ready to retake on c3 with the queen. So he makes sure his pawn structure won't be destroyed, right? So after queen c2, we usually castle here. And white usually plays a3.
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely important for black. I know we kind of covered this in the introduction a little bit, but just there's really no need to give up the bishop for the knight right away, right? Especially if you're not doubling the pawns. It's much better to castle, play some other moves, wait until white forces you to make a decision with the bishop, and now at least you're making white spend a tempo, and also the a3 move can slightly weaken white's queen side as well.
Sometimes, yeah, like Will said, when, for instance, a3 here, bishop takes, c3, queen takes, obviously not in this position, right, but the concept would be after a5 and a4, the b3 square is kind of weak. If the pawn was on a2, then we cannot get any advantage here with our a5 and a4. So, right, that is why we have to wait till white pushes a3, so then we can simply, take on c3 and then. Okay, after queen c2, castle, a3 is the main move, but before starting that one, we need to see some alternatives, like e4, which makes sense. He played queen c2 and he wants to win some space in the center. And the other one is bishop g5 as well. But let's start with e4. After e4, the most famous move here is d5. It makes sense because we are fighting for the center and we have some more development. But I like...
this is a pretty complicated line, right?
Yeah, it's complicated. Since Carlsen played against Kramnik, a game where black plays d6, it's like we take it easy here and we'll play a plan which is really great. After d6, here if white plays f4, again he's only pushing pawns, right, not developing, we can punish white by playing knight to c6, and after knight to f3, now we play e5.
This is a very thematic approach to countering this type of massive pawn storm in the center. It might seem a little bit weird that you're going to be sacrificing a pawn here, but it's 100% necessary, because as white has only been making moves with his pawns, meanwhile white's king is still in the center, black's already castled, black has a significant amount of pressure against white's center, and with this e5 break here, he's going to be slowing down white's initiative completely. Let's say, what if black had played something like queen e7? Well, then white's probably going to play e5.
Absolutely.
And have a dominating position in the center. But by playing e5, we're essentially blockading white's pawns. And after, let's say, a couple of exchanges...
d takes e5, d takes e5, f takes e5, knight g4 is great. If he tries d5 at some point, then knight d4, it's strong as well. If white takes this knight, we can simply retake, and knight on c3 it's under a pin. So here I think this works, especially because white it's down on development, right? When he plays queen c2, he's like losing a tempo in the opening because he's moving his queen, right? So
yeah, I mean this line with d6, as opposed to maybe the more popular line with d5, which is very complicated. This line with d6 is
quite solid, right? And tricky.
Yeah.
Looks innocent, but it's tricky, as we'll see.
Yeah, it's a very interesting idea, and also it's very solid. It's got a very solid positional foundation. I mean, black is most likely going to give up his dark squared bishop, and so he's already planning on putting all of his pawns on dark squares,
Absolutely.
which are going to work really well with his light squared bishop remaining on c8.
So white plays bishop to d3, makes sense. Here e5 becomes a threat. The h7 pawn is also under threat. So we play knight to c6, not only threatening the d4 pawn, but stopping e5 as well. And here after knight e2, here comes what I think it's a great move by black, which is bishop a5. Quite unexpected as well. I mean,
so what's the idea with this move? I mean, bishop a5, what's so great about it, right? I mean, he's just going backwards, not, it doesn't look that forcing. What's the idea?
Well, basically, black wants to play knight b4, I think, and then we take the bishop pair, we take the bishop on d3. You know that the bishop pair is so great, right? Especially if the position gets open. So, white castles here. And apart from knight b4, which should be okay, black plays bishop b6, and actually this is black's idea, right? We want to attack the d4 pawn, and if white plays the bishop to e3 here, which looks like the best way of defending d4, then knight to c4, and again we take the bishop pair. There's no way white can run away. So he goes d5. And now that diagonal, the b6, c1 diagonal, it's open. Now we can play knight b4. Previously, we had the chance of playing knight b4, but white had the pawn on d4. Now he played d5. Looks like a weak move, right? Opening our diagonal. Now we can take his bishop pair, and we can open the position as much as we can. Queen to d2.
You've also got to say, after this pawn push, d5, black's bishop on b6 has got to be the best piece on the board.
Right, absolutely. Here black takes on d5 first. Doesn't make any...
It's trying to open the position.
Right. We can take the bishop first. I don't see any real difference. And here I like taking the bishop. Queen takes. And yeah, I think the next move is important as well. Knight to c4 looks absolutely great. I know we're moving the knight twice, but first we stop the pin with bishop c5. The knight is coming to e5. The f2 pawn is under attack as well. Queen h4 is coming. f5 is coming. It's like I cannot see any bad thing about knight c4. It's just perfect, right?
It's definitely the move that makes the most sense. In this position...
and f5 as well, right? F5 opening, because we want to open in that position, we have the bishop pair. Yeah, it makes sense for all the moves, right? Queen h4, f5, f2, knight e5.
The thing that I really like about this example is that, white... If we go back just a few moves, let's say move 7 here after knight to e2, we start looking at the position, and my first impression here is kind of like black is crazy. Why is he playing such a passive opening? He's just giving all the center to white. But really what black is trying to do is massage white's center. He's playing for, he's in it for the long term, right? So he's saying, okay, white can have this big center right now, but we just see how black just starts chipping away at it. And honestly, in many positions like this where white is making so many pawn moves, you're going to be able to just not sit back passively, but try to make a targeted strike against the center. As in this game, after bishop to b6, there's some questions that need to be answered. How is white going to defend the pawn? And we just see how he essentially forces white to, once white pushes the pawn to d5, now it opens up all these dark squares in the center. It's opening up a lot of squares like e5 for black's knights. And, once he's got to make that push, now we're getting a lot of different counterplay in the game. Once the position opens up, as after knight to g4, really black just has a huge advantage. I think the game went on, Carlsen was playing moves like queen h4 with a lot of pressure on white's king side, and also I think he ended up playing f5, completely breaking the position open. Now he's going to use the rook on f8, the bishop on c8, and it's very thematic to break the position open with a move like f5 as black has the two bishops. So opening the position will naturally benefit his game.
So now we're going to see another line. After d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, queen c2 castle. Okay, before starting with a3, another move we have to look at, it's bishop to c5. And here we can simply go h6 first.
Again, it's really nice to put the question immediately to the bishop. As we've seen in previous examples, white is rarely going to take. If he takes a knight, you're fine. I mean, it's all good. That's going to be easy to play. And if he moves the bishop back to h4, when the things start heating up tactically, we're going to have the immediate g5 push to break that pin if we need it.
And yeah, after bishop h4, here in this specific variation, we can try c5 because white he wasted like 2 tempos with his bishop, and the idea in the Nimzo is to try to punish white's center from the beginning. So c5 is great.
c5 makes a lot of sense too. I mean, I think there's a few other lines here. I think b6 is probably playable. d6, I'm sure, maybe even d5 as well,
or knight c6 as well. But then we cannot play the c7 pawn anymore.
The c5 break makes so much sense because you can see, okay, white's bishop on h4, okay, it's not really influencing the center very much. And especially the fact that white's queen is moved to c2 is no longer protecting the d4 squares. So now c5,
that is what, c5 makes
very appropriate.
Now.
It's very appropriate to hit that pawn.
And basically our idea is, when white plays e3, this is to give a general picture, right? We're going to take on d4, our bishop on b4 is going to come back to protect the pin, and then we're going to try to play d5, take on c4, and play against the isolated pawn. That's the general idea, right? Let's try to make it work. After e4, we take, e takes d4, and now b6, bishop to d3, bishop to b7, white plays knight to e2, and here there's no need to take the g2 pawn, then rook g1, and
if you play with fire, you're going to get burned. I mean, taking the g2 pawn, I'm all about snatching a pawn and just grinding it down for 80 moves for the win. But this is crazy. Like, taking the pawn on g2, this is just too much. I mean, the compensation with the open g file, it's just going to be so easy for white to generate a dangerous attack.
So, after knight e2, we play knight c6, Then he castles. And then, like I said before, we can play bishop e7, basically protecting the knight f6 from the pin, and we also want to play knight to b4.
Yeah, it might look a little weird. It might look a little weird to play to move the bishop without white asking you to do so with a3, but basically black's just trying to play knight to b4 and just trying to get the two bishops in a fairly open position as we've already got here.
And here white plays a3, which makes sense, but now we have the chance of playing d5, and I don't see how white can stop playing with the isolated pawn. I mean,
let's talk about the candidate moves, right? I mean, I guess one idea, what if he played bishop takes f6?
Well, actually he can try, bishop takes, and now taking on d5. But then,
some interesting options here. I mean, I would really not want to take e takes d5, because now our bishop on b7 is really kind of locked in. Although we do have some excellent pressure on d4.
Yeah, but apart from the tactics like knight takes d4, here white, he's not playing with the isolated, but he gave up the bishop pair, right? Our bishop can always go back, be a c8, e6. I mean, I would be worried, for instance, here. I'll show another example, sorry. Let's say here white takes on d5 without giving up the bishop pair. Let's say we take with the knight, obviously.
Yeah, we don't want to take with the pawn here. I mean, this defeats the whole purpose of black's strategy. By playing d5 right here, black is really trying to liquidate some pawns in the center, but selectively. He's trying to give white an isolated d pawn. Let's say rook to d1. We would like to do something like this where white's going to have the isolated pawn. And so going back, just talking about this pawn structure, after pawn takes d5, taking with the pawn doesn't make any sense. I mean, what about our bishop on b7? Like, this guy had so much potential.
This is a great example. Right now, the bishop on b7, I would be really worried. And white...
So much potential wasted.
Two bishops, right? So after knight takes d5, well, if he takes, knight takes... Well, we have bishop takes h4. I mean, but just to show the example, I mean, Now e takes d5. It's, yeah, like Will said, not a great
crazy
move, right? Because bishop b7, it's there. If white takes on f6 first, and then it's like we are forced to retake on d5 with the pawn, well, it's fine, you know, we have the bishop pair and then we fix this bishop. But in this case, yeah, we have to retake with the piece on d5. I think that's the idea. Yeah, after knight takes d5, we are much, much better, I think. Let's say he takes on e7 first. He should do that. Then we can retake this way too.
Yeah. Right, taking with the knight. Yeah, I mean, if queen takes here, we're basically just having the same problem.
Right, same problem. Yeah.
We both have isolated pawns, and white is actually going to enjoy quite a plus here because of the colors of the bishops. Right, white has the pawn on a dark square on d4, the light square bishop, while you know the bishop is complementing the pawn very nicely. Meanwhile, black's bishop on the same color as the pawn on d5 is just crashing into it.
And, you know, yeah, after knight c takes e7, rook c8 is coming. We are blockading the isolated pawn successfully, so...
Black has definitely got it's not a huge advantage, but it's going to be an enduring positional advantage against that isolated d-pawn.
So now we are ready to start analyzing the main line after a3. So, let me see. After d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, queen c2, castle, a3. This is the very main line, right?
Makes sense, right? I mean, white just wants to immediately put the question to black's bishop before allowing, you know, any of the other variations we've just looked at.
And after a3, we had to take, queen takes, and now we have, well, a lot of possibilities for black. b6 being the main line, we can play d5, c5, a lot of moves. The one I like, it's knight to e4, especially because it's like we keep winning tempos, we threat the queen, and after queen c2, we play f5. We have a powerful knight on e4, we have some development advantage as well, and basically white cannot push this knight back by playing f3 because we have queen h4 check, and then we are winning, right? If king d1, we play knight to f2 check, and if he goes c3, we can simply take that pawn with knight takes, and yeah, the rook is falling. So what I mean, white has to be careful here.
This line is definitely not the principal continuation. It's not the main line in this opening, but we're recommending it here because it's very direct, it's very straightforward, and it's very easy to play. And also a benefit that it's not a main line is that your opponent is also probably going to be lacking in preparation on it.
Exactly, and here white has two main moves. Knight h3, but we'll see that later, and yeah, it's kind of a weird move as well, but we'll see that. And e3, which makes sense as well. Now it's like the queen is ready to help in the second rank. So here we play b6, just like we saw in the introduction and in this chapter as well. Placing our pawns on the dark squares, it's great, so our bishop, it's a great one as well. After b6, white goes f3. Well, here, instead of going back with our knight, we can play queen h4. And this is an example of Grandmaster Michael Adams, which I like so much. This example, c3, knight takes c3, and now white has to play queen f2, so he doesn't look his rook. And we have f4.
Only move.
Only move. And basically we can play knight f5 later, and, well, we are...
So if he takes the pawn on f4, we can just go knight back to f5, and white's pawns are ruined.
Right.
And if he doesn't take...
He plays, actually, knight to h3.
Now he's threatening to take the knight.
Right, and we cannot take the rook because the queen is falling, so we play knight to f5, which is great. Now if he takes the queen, we retake, and we have two threats, right? The f3 pawn and the e3 pawn as well. So white has to take on f4. Knight takes f4, bishop b7, I like it. See, we don't have the bishop pair, but we have the initiative, right? Which is so important. And white pieces are not well coordinated. His pawns are like, I don't know, this pawn structure is not that common, right? And not that strong either, so bishop e2, protecting against the bishop takes f3 threat. And here black plays knight to c6. Like we said before, right now, knight to a5 and knight b3, it's a possibility, right? Because white played a3. Otherwise, there's no chance we play that.
Every pawn moves creates a weakness, right? That a3 move, just even just a weak square on b3 could become significant.
Here white goes knight c2.
Trying to kick out the queen.
Right. You know, playing with queen's own here, I will consider it for black, but I don't see any problem in playing an endgame, because white pieces are not well coordinated here, especially here after knight d6. See, in some variations, especially if he goes bishop to d2, knight e4 check may become, an idea. And also here after knight d6, we can try bishop a6 later, knight to a5. Why not putting some more pressure on the f file, especially the f3 pawn, sorry. And I think our position here is great. So that is, this is what I like playing against the e3. Remember, we can play b6. If white goes kind of crazy with f3, I think we can just take that pawn on c3 and then play f4. His pawn structure is like weak, so I think we have a great chance of taking the advantage there. So now we'll move to knight h3, which should be the main move, and we have to know how to play against it. 1 minute. Okay.
So this knight h3 move that we're going to see here is definitely pretty strange, but it's got a very direct tactical concept behind it, and we kind of saw this move in the last game pretty much with the same idea, more or less. So let's go ahead and get started here after 6, knight e4, queen c2, f5, and now knight h3. The idea is very direct. White really just wants to play f3 and evict black's knight from the strong square on e4, right? So we looked at earlier, if f3 immediately, black just has queen h4 check, and he's going to win the house, right? It's a yard sale. White is just dropping pieces left and right. g3 is impossible. We'll just snatch the pawn. But, why we can snatch that pawn is because the h2 pawn is pinned. We can snatch it because of the pin. So basically the idea behind knight h3 is very simple, even though it looks kind of weird. Now there's no pin after f3 and queen h4.
And the f2 square is protected as well, right?
Also, yeah. So that's basically the idea is knight h3 is preparing to play f3, and sometimes the knight can jump into the center knight square on f4 as well.
So yeah, after knight h3, we can simply go d6 in this case. We can also go b6. I mean, we have a lot of options, but what I like about d6 is that we have the chance of playing e5 as well. And we try to play e5, I mean, pushing our pawns in the center, because he played knight to h3. And the knight there is like, he doesn't belong to h3.
This idea with d6 is pretty cool. It really reminds me of the classical Dutch, actually. Although black has given up his bishop, it's kind of like the classical Dutch. A couple different ways to play this. Damien was saying, I mean, with d6 and e5, we have like the classical Dutch style. If we play b6, it's kind of like the bird, where black's going to be putting the fianchetto. But the move d6 is cool because, first of all, I think a lot of people, this is not going to be something they're so prepared for, this idea with d6. Also, let's say if white in the future plays knight to f4, we're going to be able to just take a lot of control in the center. And so I think d6 is a very nice weapon. It's very solid, just trying to gain space very directly in the center.
So here white plays f3. Yeah, that was his idea when he played knight h3, right? We go back, knight f6. There's no sense in playing queen h4 there.
Yeah, queen h4, you're just going to lose a piece. There's no knight takes g3, he just takes it, and it's not doing anything here. So black's going to have to just
after f3 we go back. Here white plays e3. Yeah, he wants to finish development.
So you got to think. I mean, even though black, it's kind of weird. I mean, it's like he took the knight on c3 with the bishop a while ago. Then he brought the knight to e4 and kicked white's queen out, and now the knights had to go back. There's been a lot of both sides kind of losing tempo. White's played a lot of pawn moves, a3 and f3, but even though white's got, his center looks like he's controlling a lot of squares, really it's kind of a weird setup, right? I mean, the pawn on f3 and e3, and this is okay, he's got a lot of square control now, but it's kind of loose, right? Having made so many pawn moves here.
So after, e3 here.
So black is getting ready to play moves like e5.
And now we are ready to play
a lot
e5,
of different choices.
Actually, white takes.
So what about, I think e5 kind of needs to happen immediately. I mean, if knight c6, maybe white's going to go bishop d3, and all of a sudden the e5 move.
We'll have to be careful with the f5 pawn, But e5, then we also want to open the position a bit, because despite, the fact we don't have the bishop pair, I think we have more development, and that's the idea, right? We have to open lines just to try to punish white for having the king on e1.
Yeah, white's been making all those pawn moves. The knight's on h3 out of the game.
Right.
The queen on c2 is not exactly helping out with the king either.
Right.
And so e5 is a very thematic move. First of all, gaining space. We're keeping the knight away from the center on f4, and we're getting ready to open the e-file to start putting some pressure on white's king there.
That is why I think white took on e5 to close the e-file as well. I mean,
if bishop d3, for example, maybe aside from ideas like e4, maybe we just take it
and blockade.
We have a nice control of the e-file.
So after pawn takes, knight to f2 makes sense. And here a very nice move for
here we
black.
had d takes e5.
D takes e5 and knight to f2.
For white. Okay,
And then knight c6. Usually, a lot of players, they would prefer knight d7, but I think knight c6 in this case is great because apart from developing, a nice idea would be trying to play f4 in the future. We move the e3 pawn, and then we have a nice square for our knight on d4.
Yeah, I mean, I think one big difference with this d6 and e5 plan, aside from kind of more standard lines from different lines in the Nimzo, is that a lot of times black is looking to play moves like b6 and bishop b7. But with the d6 and e5 plan, we're really changing our whole strategy, and now playing this b6 and bishop b7, first of all, it doesn't make that much sense because what about the f pawn, the f5 pawn? Right. So I think knight c6, we're changing our plan. We're trying to open the center, and the knight's going to be in a much more active square on c6, much more natural developing move.
Here white goes bishop d3. Which it's great, right? It's threatening the f5 pawn. Here black finds another great idea as well, which is e4. And after f takes, knight to e5.
So this is kind of a crazy pawn sacrifice. I mean, what's the reasoning here for black? Why would he sack this pawn like this?
Well, when white goes bishop d3 here, he still has the bishop pair. He wants to take the f5 pawn. But actually here we are sacrificing a pawn for one reason. I mean, now the knight on c6, it's improving. The bishop on d3 right now looks like a tall pawn. I mean, it's not doing much. The bishop on c1, it's also a tall pawn. But here we have some threats, right? Like the bishop on d3, f takes e4 as well. It's like we are trying to punish white again for being down on development, right? That is why we consider this pawn sacrifice.
I think even if white is to take the f5 pawn, maybe we can just snatch on d3.
Right.
Even if we need to trade queens.
I think that,
Black still has awesome positional compensation. I mean, white's pawn structure, the pawn on e3 is extra pawn. It's almost like white's he's worse off with it. It's blocking his own bishop, and I think here black has got more than ample positional compensation. I mean, he's so far ahead in development. I wouldn't be surprised if he's going to win a pawn back and maintain a positional edge.
So after 95, that is why I guess white played bishop e2, right? I mean, going back with the bishop, f takes e4. Well, here I don't think white can take the e4 pawn because of bishop f5, and again we have such a great compensation there. But okay, white
This
castle.
is a nice line. Maybe if bishop to f3, trying to hold that knight, maybe we could snatch it.
And then yeah, queen h4, right? And this happens because white didn't.
His king.
His king, right?
king
He's
is
not
set-
developing.
Yeah. So I mean, when people's kings are in the center, and you know this pawn sacrifice, trying to take advantage of that, these kind of tactics are naturally going to start appearing.
So here white castles, but yeah, after bishop f5, I think we have a great position. White couldn't play the bishop on c1 yet, and if he does, then a move like knight f3 check.
Yeah, let's say maybe b4. If white was trying to put the bishop on a nice diagonal, and
But
this
then,
idea
yeah.
with knight f3 is just murderous.
Right, actually right now, knight f3, if white goes b4, then he can retake with the bishop, I think. But, you know, we can also try knight to d3 instead.
There's a lot of pressure. Yeah, I guess
we
the
have
knight
a lot of-
f.
We have a lot of ideas, right?
Yeah.
But knight f3 will be
Maybe that's
dangerous
more of
in
an
the
idea.
future.
Yeah.
I mean,
maybe that's also more of an idea against bishop to d2, like a natural move.
yeah, or we can play queen d7 first, and then knight f3. It's great as well. You know,
There's just so many moves. I mean, maybe even you know b4. We could even consider maybe something like queen to
queen
e8.
e8, queen c6. Yeah, and the knight on f2, which was great some moves ago, it's like now it's
It's got to be the worst
in
piece
jail.
of the game.
Yeah. So here I think, yeah, black's compensation, or well, not compensation, material-wise we are equal. So yeah, we cannot talk about compensation. But I mean, our initiative, it's so great.
We could
And
say
you-
white has no compensation for,
No
for
compensation.
black's advantage in the center.
And for his bishop pair is not playing much. So I think this is the kind of position we have to look for when we play this variation. So well,
Just to run through it real quick,
yeah,
you know, after a3, exchanging, jamming the knight on e4, supporting it with f5. Now this d6 idea, kind of similar to the classical Dutch.
yeah.
The knight's going to go back. We're going to break in the center immediately to capitalize on all these pawn moves. White's misplaced knight on h3.
Right.
And now we're changing the plan from the other type of b6, bishop b7 stuff, knight to c6. e4, just blasting it open thematically with black's lead in development. His king is safe. And from here on out, I mean, I think black just has a very comfortable game. So that's going to wrap things up for this chapter on the queen c2 variation. We can see that black has a lot of different resources. You don't always need to embrace the main lines that are more complicated. A lot of times, like the lines that we're recommending here, you know, there's a lot of sound continuations that are very direct that are maybe not the main lines that might be catching your opponent a little off guard with respect to his preparation.
So now we're going to continue with chapter number 2, which is the E3 variation, most known as the Rubinstein variation. D4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, and here white plays e3. This is the most solid system, right? Together with queen c2 and e3, they are the most famous lines against the Nimzo. And okay, after e3, we're gonna castle here. Basically, white can play in some ways after e3. Usually, white continues with knight e2, and this is the first line we're gonna see. Then he can play bishop d3 and knight e2, or knight to f3 as well. So we're gonna see a weapon against all these systems, right? But usually we have to keep a solid position. For instance, after knight e2, then taking the knight on c3 doesn't make any sense, right? Because then white is gonna retake with the other knight and his pawn structure remains great. That is why here I like playing rook to e8.
I think that's got to be the biggest difference in a lot of lines in the Rubinstein variation is that white is really just banking on setting up a very solid position early in the opening and avoiding the doubling of his pawns. So we need to adapt our plan against the traditional Nimzo-Indian where we're trying to snatch the knight on c3 and double the pawns. A lot of times here, okay, the bishop's on b4, but we can always bring it back home instead of giving white the two bishops without receiving the compensation of doubling his c-pawns.
So after rook e8, white goes a3, and now we play bishop f8.
This looks like kind of goofy, right? I mean, bringing the bishop all the way back, but really, black has an incredibly solid position, and he's ready to start trying to gain space in the center.
And now our idea as black is to play something like the Queen's Gambit as black, but take a look at white's position. His bishop is on c1, the Queen's Gambit usually the bishop is on g5. He played knight to e2, which is not the best square for the knight. The knight belongs to f3 usually. So it's like we're gonna play a better version of the Queen's Gambit. White plays c3. He wants to put pressure on that diagonal, so that makes sense. We go d5, attacking the c4 pawn. White takes. We retake with the pawn, so we control the e4 square. The bishop on c8 can go out too.
Also opens the rook on e8.
Right,
half open e5.
Absolutely. Now the rook e8, which was like useless when we played it. Now the rook is pretty well placed there. So yeah. After e takes, bishop c2. And here comes, I think, an important position. A lot of players, myself too, I would consider c6 here to try to stop the bishop on g2. But I think that playing a5 first is better because we stop b4, right? And I mean the rook b1 and b4 plan, which is again so typical in the Queen's Gambit. If we play a5 here, knight to a6, we can play c6 later, and then it's like we stop white's queenside attack, and we also play against the bishop c2 with b5 and c6.
This is a very common idea. You're going to see a lot of times that the Nimzo-Indian will, transition to very similar ideas against the Queen's Gambit, and really sometimes in the Slav defense as well. Right here, I think this
Caro-Kann as well when we play against the isolated pawn, like we saw before. Yeah,
I think this idea by playing the early a5, you really do see this in a lot of lines of the Slav defense. And basically, I mean, if you just play c6, white, maybe not immediately, but white really might try the minority attack with b4, later by b5, trying to create a lot of weaknesses here in black's
I think
position.
we can go b4 right now. If we go a5, then b5 would be annoying. So, yeah, that is why I think we play a5 immediately.
Yeah.
White can play b4 without castling. I mean, there's no danger.
Absolutely.
It's quite solid, right? I mean,
if white's paying attention after c6, maybe he'll just jam ahead with b4.
Right.
And he's just immediately he's got a counterplay set up with the minority attack, probably going to pressure on the c file, etc. So this idea with a5, it seems like, oh come on, we can wait to play, but really it's really good idea to go ahead and just jam it out. And now it's going to be a lot more difficult for white to create counterplay on the queen side.
So yeah, after a5, white castles. Now we're following Morozevic's game as black, which I like so much. After castling, we go knight a6. Yeah, the knight there a6 doesn't look like the best square for our knight. But once we play c6, the knight comes via c7 and e6, and why not c5 as well? I mean, our knight has a lot of future there. White goes bishop d2. We play c6. So everything is under control. There's no way white can play b4 yet. And our knight from a6 is coming to c7 and e6. White goes rook c1. We play knight c7. So logical. And after knight a4, we can play knight e6. Stopping knight b6 and also knight to c5. And okay, white now, he'll be able to play b4 since he played knight a4. But at the same time, he's not controlling the e4 square anymore, so that means we can play knight e4 later.
That's a good thing to really point out there. I mean, when the knight vacates the center, knight c3 to a4, the first thing you should think is, I should try to exploit this by jumping into the e4 square and occupying it.
Right, so here we can actually, white plays b4, we play knight to e4, and we want to take the bishop pair. If he goes bishop e1, I like take him, and after a takes b4, the move I like here is knight to d6. See, the c4 square, it's available for us.
It might seem a little bit weird, all these maneuvers, the knight's on e6 and d6, but really rerouting the knight to d6. A knight on d6.
It's also stopping b5, right?
Also stopping b5. Yeah, that's very important. Yeah. The knight on d6, you know, both knights, but especially the knight on d6 is incredibly well placed because it just controls so many critical squares in the center.
And white's bishops both, right? Bishop c2 is not helping much, and bishop e1 it's like close there. So yeah, I really like this position for black. See, our position remains solid, right? And I think we can try to improve at both sides. Queen side, we have a lot of future there, and king side as well. I mean, we can try to play something like knight c5, and you know, the h3 square is weak. If he goes something like, if he advances the f pawn, then the e3 pawn is gonna be weak as well. The e4 square. It's a long game, but with a lot of future for black. And as usual, we keep our solid position. So I think this is the best way to play against this knight c2 line, right? Rook e8 and bishop f8. We'll see that white can try to play knight e2 in other variations, but playing bishop d3 first, and we'll see how to play against that as well. So now let's move to another line. But this knight c2 immediately is the first line we have to see, because looks like the idea when white plays e3.
Yeah, I mean, after e3, you know, I suppose you could play just directly bishop takes knight, just doubling the pawns right away. But it's just not really something you want to do as black. I mean, you don't want to take the knight immediately. You know, it'd be much better to castle, and then if he plays a3, you know, make him play a3. Make him provoke that bishop takes knight. You know, I think that's got to be one of the main ideas in the Nimzo is, you know, why just immediately take the knight? You know, you want to make your opponent, make him use a tempo to make you take the knight.
So let's go to another line. After d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, e3, castle, bishop d3.
This is a little bit more of a natural grouping for white's development, you know, bringing the bishop to d3 instead of the knight to e2 immediately.
And here again we have a lot of options, right? As we said before, the Nimzo is so flexible, and we can transition to so many openings like the Slav and the Queen's Gambit. And that is why here I like d5. It's like we want to transition to a Queen's Gambit, and here white can choose knight g2 or knight f3. That sounds like knight e2 it's white's idea, right? When he plays e3, protecting his pawn structure.
Yeah, I mean, just to remark quickly here, I mean, there are a ton of options for black. I think d6, d5,
c5, b6,
c5, b6, maybe even knight c6,
yeah,
probably even rook e8. But what we're really trying to focus on in this DVD is not, you know, exhaustively analyzing every continuation. We're trying to get the recommendation of a strong grandmaster on what's going to be the simplest and the most direct line for you, not just to achieve equality from the opening, but to press for an advantage early on.
So yeah, after knight c2, here I like a line which is perhaps a bit surprising and you won't find it quite often, but after knight e2, we can take on c4. Since the knight is not going to f3, right, controlling the center, here we can afford doing this. Bishop takes c4, and here we have e5. Again, see, the knight is not on f3, so that's why we can afford doing something like this, right? Punishing the center. What happens if white takes, right? I mean,
this is a really nice tactic too. I mean, this really does go to show how you can really exploit when someone's kind of delaying castling in the center. You know, his coordination is kind of a little bit weird with the knight on e2. You know, it is understandable he wants to protect his knight. He wants to make sure there's not going to be double pawns there. But after pawn takes c4 and e5, a highly instructive example. You know, you're going away from traditional Nimzo-Indian style here. But again, I mean, this is a line maybe not so mainstream, and a very good chance you're going to catch your opponent off guard.
And yeah, if he takes, we take the queen. King takes c1 is the only move since knight c3 is under a pin. And then knight g4, very good position for us. King on d1 is not great.
This is a horrible position for white. He's got nothing, man.
And bishop c1 is still inside the pawn chain.
I don't even know what to play for white. Rook f1, you probably just snatch the h pawn and then go back to g4.
Right.
It doesn't do anything. Really, the only move that I see to
King e1.
Yeah, King e1 is just terrible. And after king to e1 there,
knight takes e5. Also d3 square is weak. Yeah, actually,
this is horrible for white.
I would say, you know, I bet black is already winning here. I mean,
yeah.
Well, clearly better. I mean,
clearly better. I mean, I don't even know how does white stop this knight to d3.
That is why, because it's amazing, but I can state that, you know.
This is a mess. I mean, white is busted here. So the e5 move, e5 is an excellent way for black to try to exploit white just leaving the queen in the center there.
So that is what happens if white takes on e5. So now let's see what happens if he goes queen c2. Now he's ready to take on e5 and we don't have queen takes d1. But we have knight c6, which is great. Attacking the d4 and protecting e5, right?
Yeah, there's really no need to release the tension and capture the pawn on d4 here. White would have two very pleasant alternatives. Options. I mean, he could take and have the isolated d pawn, or he could simply take with his knight. And, you know, by initiating that exchange on d4, you're almost giving white a free move by recapturing, you know, helping him develop towards the center. So much better, knight c6, maintaining the tension, actually upping the tension by now threatening to capture the pawn on d4 and win a pawn.
And, you know, if white takes on e5 now, it's
similar to as before, the d3
right.
square is a huge weakness.
Yeah, knight takes e5, and yeah, unless he plays bishop b5 now.
Even bishop b5, I mean, this is...
And then we can push that bishop back and then knight d3, right?
Yeah, this is looking really good.
So that is why in this game, white plays a3.
This is kind of a thematic thing here. I think, you know, in these kind of situations where you're going away from the traditional Nimzo, you start dicing it up in the center. White will often try to throw this move a3 in to try to make black make a decision with the bishop.
Yeah, after a3, black takes on d4.
Yeah, I mean, what are the options, right? I mean, really, either pawn takes d4 as an intermediate move. Also, bishop takes knight on c3. You're just giving away the two bishops. Looks like he can probably just capture with the pawn even. And super solid pawn center.
Yeah, and they are not doubled, so one day he'll play a4, bishop a3, and yeah, he'll have two powerful bishops.
Yeah, even if you try to play e4, trying to lock it down, I mean, really there's no way to stop white in the future from pushing the pawn to c4,
and
bishop b2,
and
you know, his bishops, they're just going to kill it. You know, the game is going to open up. There's no way for black to keep it close forever, and the bishops are just going to be too good.
Right. So yeah, a takes c4, I think it's great. And yeah, white has to take our bishop. I don't think he can take the d4 pawn, right? I
guess the other alternative, just really quick, would be bishop a5 or something, and allowing b4. I mean, there's just no need.
Yeah, we are giving white some extra tempos there. Yeah, I think
it's not called for.
White has to take here on b4. If he does, you know, he does take on d4, I think we can also, I mean, like e takes or knight takes. We can play knight takes d4 anyway, and then the bishop on c4 is also hanging. So
White's king is
still there.
A little lonely there, yeah.
This is not great. So he takes on b4. We take on c3.
I also want to say, like, in these types of complications where white tries to insert the intermediate move a3, this is a highly instructive way to deal with that, where black is not retreating from the complications. He's jumping in head first, right? And this is just instructive for any type of tactical melees, any type of tactical mix-ups. You don't want to shy away from the complications. You want to embrace them, and you want to try to make your opponent flinch first. You want to make your opponent step back and be scared to keep going after shot and shot and shot. So this type of reaction here by taking the pawn on d4, continuing to take the knight on c3, very instructive in this type of situation and any other type of tactical mix-up where both sides are really just bringing the pain with each move.
So yeah, after d takes, the thing is, if white retakes with the queen or the pawn...
What's to the pawn, I think looks maybe a little more natural, right?
Yeah,
trying to undouble his pawns.
We have a very nice move. We had before as well. We analyzed this knight to e5, and then the d3 square, it's, yeah.
It's just so weak.
And
D3 is just, I mean,
and
that's
the bishop,
huge.
right? He has to play bishop b5, and then, yeah.
Probably just C6.
So, yeah.
Yeah, A6 not quite as good now. It's not even making a threat with the A file.
There is a rook on A8, right?
Yeah.
But C6, yeah, probably.
C6. Now, you know, as soon as the bishop's gone, black is
Knight D3 and Knight E4.
pretty much got a winning advantage here. I mean, Knight E4, bishop F5, knight, you know, it's all good for black. It's too easy to play.
And yeah, well, if he takes with the knight, then the b4 pawn is falling. So, and if he takes with the queen, I bet that, you know, knight e4 is great.
This looks like a free tempo on the queen.
Yeah.
Let's say if queen back to c2. I don't know. There's some really interesting stuff here. Maybe queen to h4 is an idea.
Queen h4, bishop f5.
Bishop f5, very natural.
We have a lot of, you know, and the b4 pawn remains. Yeah,
knight e5. I mean, everything is good for black. I mean, this is a really cool way to play the Nimzo, right? I mean, it's not one of the main lines with this e5 push, you know, a couple moves ago. But once you see things start opening up after e5, and white's king is still in the center, white has made a lot of pawn moves in the opening. His setup has taken a lot of time with the knight coming to e2. Black, you know, he didn't waste any time by taking the pawn on c4 as white had already developed his bishop. This is really cool. I mean, this is a very active way to play the Nimzo, and you can see that black is calling the shots, right? I mean, white is forced to react with every single move, and that's a very good sign.
So here white goes b5, which is more active, and now there's no need to take on b2 first. Then after bishop takes b2, the bishop c1, which was sleeping a move ago, then the bishop comes to b2 with great power. We can go knight e5, you know.
Yeah. In this position, I mean, by taking the pawn, just to elaborate a little bit, I mean, okay, white is sacked a pawn, right? Black's up a whole pawn. But, I mean, let's think about this, right? I mean, the whole purpose was black was trying to call the shots, right? Now white's in charge. White's the boss. He's got the incredible bishops. Black's extra pawn is completely irrelevant. I mean, even though black has a 3-on-1 majority on the queen side, it's going to take a long time for that to even matter. Right? It's completely irrelevant. Meanwhile, we can see that white, his bishops are just killing it. In such an open position with those bishops, I'd be very worried about playing black. So I think the move that Damien suggests, the immediate knight e5, a much better idea than being greedy and snatching a pawn.
And then after queen takes c3.
So try to defend the bishop, maintain control of d3.
Here, apart from knight takes c4, which should be great, black found a nice move, which is bishop e6.
This is killer, right? We identified the tactical idea, knight to d3. That's what we want to do. Bishop e6 is making it happen.
Yeah, and after, bishop takes e6, knight d3 check should be enough. And if he takes the knight on e5, then bishop takes c4. And we have opposite colored bishops, which are, you know, favoring the attacking side. And actually, white cannot castle after bishop takes c4, right?
This is. I mean, you know, I guess materials equal here. First of all, white's almost definitely gonna lose the b5 pawn, but that pawn doesn't even matter. I mean, we got the opposite colored bishops. We got the major lead in development. I don't even know how white castles. When's he gonna get his bishop in the game? Black is seriously in charge here. So just to review quickly, after bishop e6, the monster shot. If let's say bishop takes e6, this knight to d3 check is just. That's game over. I mean, that's it. Let's say he tries king f1. I mean, even just taking the pawn on e6, there's just so much pressure just about to drop a bomb on the f2 square. I mean, black is practically winning here already.
So here, let's go back to the main line. When white plays bishop d3, bishop b4, we play e3, castles, bishop d3, d5. And here, white goes knight to f3.
It's a little bit more of a natural grouping for the knight.
And now we don't have, that e5, which looks great. But what I like playing here, as I said here in the Nimzo, we can transition to so many openings, right? I like playing b6.
Yeah, this is a lot different, right? I mean, maybe taking on c4 immediately doesn't make so much sense. Kind of giving up your control in the center, you know, I mean,
yeah, it's played. I mean,
it's playable,
and we can play c5 as well. We have knight b7. We have so many ideas for black here. What I like about b6 is that, you know, we can try to get into transition to a, queen's gambit, but the bishop, white's bishop, it's on c1, right?
A big difference, yeah, very important. It's going to be tough for white to get that bishop into the game. And just one more word about taking a pawn on c4. You know, personally, I really just like to maintain the tension as long as possible in this type of situation. I mean, taking a pawn on c4, certainly a playable move, but what you're doing is you're relieving the tension in the center. Right now, it's going to be a lot easier for white to know exactly. I mean, you played your hand, right? You showed your cards. White knows what you're going to do. By playing a move like b6, a lot more flexible. White might even have to consider bishop to a6 in some lines.
Right.
And it just, you know, even if you know you want to take the pawn on c4, white doesn't know that. He's going to have to at least use more time and energy in contemplating all the alternatives because b6 is a more flexible option.
Yeah, so after b6, he castles. And like Will says, there's no need to take immediately. We can play bishop b7.
What's the rush?
Right, there's no rush. And after a3...
Okay, now there is a little rush. Right?
Yeah, now,
it's not,
and now we have to... Well, actually, we can consider taking on c3, but since we played d5, white is going to double his pawns, so...
That's very important, right? I mean, taking the knight on c3, a lot of... You know, the main idea with giving up your dark squared bishop, which is a good bishop in the Nimzo, right? A lot of times your pawns are on light squares like e6 and d5 here. The main idea is to double the pawns and to be able to latch on to that c4 pawn and keep that weakness there. But by playing d5, okay, the pawns are double right now, but they're not going to stay that way. And so by giving away the dark squared bishop, you know, white is just going to get rid of his double pawns, his weakness, and white's just going to keep the two bishops, right? I mean, black's not going to really have a lot of compensation for giving away the dark squared bishop.
So yeah, after a3, we go back to d6. See, our idea, we are going to play a6 later, so white won't have the chance of playing knight b5 in the future. Of course, if he goes knight to b5 now, we can simply go bishop e7, we push that knight back, and then we go bishop d6 again. Actually, after that variation, it's white who's losing some tempos. We won a tempo because we played a6 and the knight lands on c3 anyway. I mean, it's like, looks like we are losing the tempo, but it's white who's losing the tempo. Yeah, because we got what we wanted, right? The a6.
Yeah. We don't even have to bring the bishop back to d6 immediately even. I mean, we could just say, okay, we'll win a tempo with a6.
We can consider playing d takes c4 and b5 as well, since we won a tempo.
Very good, yeah.
Or c5. We have so many options, right?
Yeah. So no need to worry about it. I mean, the knight b5 threat after bishop d6,
no,
very superficial. It's not going to work out.
So white, in this case, this is a Carlsen's game, and after looking at this game, I started paying attention to b6. Well, white takes on d5. We take with the pawn.
Yeah, so white here, basically by capturing on d5, is trying to make black recapture the pawn. And now black's bishop isn't going to have the option after like a d takes c4 becoming open.
If we take with the piece like the knight or the bishop, then white will have the chance of playing e4 in the future.
He could even play it right now, yeah.
Yeah. Then the bishop on c1, it's great. Yeah,
it's almost like you messed up a Grunfeld here with black, right? You gave him the huge center, and there's not really much compensation for black.
Yeah, we have to take with the pawn on d5.
It's not exactly what you want to do to close in your bishop, but bishop on b7 is doing something very useful. It's controlling the e4 square. Black's going to be able to jam a piece in there.
Perhaps the move I wouldn't play as, for instance, white plays before, but the move I wouldn't play as black here is c6. Then the bishop is completely useless. But from d7, the bishop is still doing a great job because it supports knight to e4. I mean, we may think that the bishop on b7 is useless, but it's not that useless. If we go c6, then it's completely useless. But if we play a6, for instance, then we can try to play knight e4 in the future. The bishop here is great, actually. It's doing a great job. Actually, I would be concerned about bishop b2. That bishop is not doing
It's blocked by its own knight.
Yeah, but bishop b7, if we compare bishop b7 with bishop b2, I bet bishop b7 is much, much better.
Yeah, and I do just want to mention real quick here, the setup that black is employing is usually called a Blackburn-Zukertort setup, with this queenside bishop fianchetto and supporting the e4 square and everything like that. And we can also see black's bishop on d6 is killing it, pointing right at white's king.
Absolutely.
The other bishop is also, there's a lot of influence from those bishops in the center.
And once we play knight e4 as well, it's like we'll have more attacking chances,
Say
right?
B4, maybe not 94 instantly, but
No,
when you see the
A6,
position is going to open up, I mean,
Right.
maybe F5, and it's a very committal move, maybe in the future, F5 trying to lift a rook and jam out, or, after 94, we also have some ideas of bringing the queen out to attack on the king side as well in the future.
Yeah, it depends on what white plays, but I mean, those are ideas we had to consider them. Definitely they are useful.
So after B4, I mean, what do you think is going to be the most appropriate response for black?
Well, we have to play A6. It's like basically our idea is when we play bishop D6 in the future, we play A6 not only to stop knight B5, but it will be quite annoying for us if white goes B5.
Right, let's say knight D7 and white
D7.
plays B5. This is a very common way for white, let's just say in any situation really where you have a fianchetto, but it's in this specific for white to clamp down on that fianchetto. And you want to talk about a good pawn structure. I mean, that pawn on B5, even though on the queen side, white has less pawns. That pawn on B5 is really annoying. It's really going to clamp down, especially on the C pawn, right?
And he can try A4 and bishop A3 to trade off those, especially bishop D6, which is our best bishop, right?
Yeah, so B5, this is a very common trick to lock down this fianchetto, and if white is able to really clamp on that, it's going to be a long-term plus.
Right, that's why we play A6, right?
Yeah, so now if B5...
Then A5, we have a lot of options. We can also take and then try to push that knight back. But I mean, now A5, it's interesting.
Very reliable positional trick.
Yeah, we can... I would take probably because I don't... Now, it's like we'll advance our pawns. Yeah.
There's no clamp.
Right. That is the difference.
Knight takes, we just go back, no big deal.
So remember, A6 is not only to stop knight B5. Knight B5 is like, not a...
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, because we can go back. But B5 is like a serious threat. So yeah, here white goes queen B3.
It's a good move.
Yeah.
It's very logical.
But we go queen E7. Here I'll show just a variation where we can play knight E4 successfully.
I think queen E7 too, another big point is eyeing up on that B4 pawn.
Right.
Maybe white was trying to play...
A4, right?
Yeah, maybe white was trying to get in A4 and A5, which would really mess up black's positional ideas on the queen side. But with the idea of queen E7, I mean, we just line it up, very natural, developing a very centralized spot for the queen.
So after queen E7, white goes rook B1. See, white still wants to go A4 and B5.
This guy.
So yeah, it won't be easy to play against it. So yeah, we play knight BD7. See, our setup, it's pretty easy to remember, looks so great to play. And then white goes A4. It's like, yeah, B5 is coming, but
B5 or A5, right?
Yeah.
Either one is an
A5.
option.
Well, if he goes A5, I would strongly consider playing B5. It's not clear, but
yeah,
B5, I think B5, yeah.
It is, to me, this is slightly uncomfortable for black. Just, okay, the B pawn is definitely weak, right? We're targeting that.
Yeah.
But white is also going to control the C file. That's what I'd be concerned about. I mean, maybe if we could maneuver a knight to C4 to block it.
Then we would be...
that would be fantastic, yeah, just an idea.
But that if we play, I know after playing something like C6 in that position would be terrible, looking. But it's also true that the bishop on B7 is defending it, and white can place like 3 rooks on that file, but he won't take that pawn. So, and
we got
like
options.
You said, the B4 pawn, the queen is overloaded defending it, the rook as well. Complicated, but as we'll see...
very solid for black, don't
Very solid, and white doesn't have much.
Yeah.
Bishop on C1 is terrible as well.
Yeah, I think the idea with C6 is really nice, or if we can blockade this with the knight on C4.
That would be even better.
Either one, I mean,
we have a long game
satisfactory.
here. Yeah. So here white plays after rook F E8. He goes B5, and this is a very nice example. Black takes. Let's see. And usually white's idea is to retake with the pawn. We were talking about this. But here, black has the chance of playing knight to E4. Usually we won't have this chance because the D5 pawn is falling. But actually...
Yeah, what happens if he snatches the D5 pawn here?
Yeah,
it really looks like
in a game,
it,
right? Actually, unbelievable, but this is what white played.
So it looks like white kind of fell for one here.
Yeah, absolutely. Bishop takes, queen takes, and then we have knight C3.
to pick up that exchange. So I mean, you got to be attentive here for black. I mean, if he doesn't play knight e4 right now, it might become slightly uncomfortable. I mean, he can probably play like h6 and queen e6 to defend d5, then knight e4. But
yeah, but
why even
like
waste your time? I mean, just get it in right now. And, you know, if you want to make it happen, this is the time to make it work.
And the thing is, after knight e4, we want to play knight d to f6, and then we have a serious
everything is flowing.
Yeah.
Everything is going together in the center.
But the problem is, we have to play knight e4 when we have the chance, like here. Otherwise, it's like we won't play knight e4 later. Let's say we play, instead of knight e4, we play something like h6. Let's say it's a useful move. But here, white can go something like bishop d2, defending everything. Or d2, you know. And after knight e4, knight takes d5. It's possible, because then we don't have any trick based on knight c3.
Yeah. Or maybe, you know, white is going to try knight to d2 and just...
But I mean, we won't play knight e4 again, I think, or at least
it's going to be tough.
It's going to be tough, right?
It's not going to be that easy.
So knowing all this, I think now we are ahead. I mean, in knowledge to play this. So that's all for the e3 line. I think we have to, for instance, against knight e2, immediately in the opening, this rook e8 and bishop f8, it's great. Against bishop d3 and knight e2. Taking on c4 and e5. See, we have specific ideas against all white lines, right? And against knight f3, we can play b6, play like the queen's gambit, right? And I think in this specific variation, I like black's possibilities. So we're going to start with chapter 3, where we are going to consider alternatives for white. After d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4. Let's start with f3, which looks like, yeah, a non-development move, but it's being played especially by Alexei Shirov, right? And this is a very aggressive system. White is not developing a piece, but he wants to build up, you know, a strong center with e4, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a common idea for white against the Nimzo-Indian. You know, with the moves like knight f6, e6, and bishop b4, we really know that black is not, you know, as in many other openings, compared to many other openings, in this, black is not making a direct stand in the center yet. You know, he's not playing d5,
right.
He's not playing e5 or c5, and so, you know, a natural reaction to that by white is that white normally wants to build a big mass of pawns in the center and gain a bunch of space. So I think that's really the idea with the f3 line. You know, he's really just trying to put it in your face. He's trying to play e4 and build a massive pawn wall.
So that is why against f3, I think that the best move for us is, you know, d5. Now we are fighting for the centers, and since he's not playing knight to f3, which is more natural, I think we have to play d5 to control the center. White goes a3 here, and right now if we take the knight on c3, which is you know, theory and it's playable, problem is, in my opinion, that after b takes c3, he's gonna undouble his pawns. And well, if we take the c4 pawn there, he's gonna play e4 later, and that c4 pawn is history, you know.
Yeah, that c4 pawn is not gonna stick. I mean, he can play e4. Yeah, we can try to hold on to it. I mean, just to make a point, I mean, he can just play check and just scoop it, and then he's gonna have the two bishops, a huge center, and it's a little bit dicey to play for black. So I think really, you know, when you play d5,
yeah,
with a pawn on c4 here, I mean, why take the knight on c3? I mean, you know, you're doubling his pawns for 1 second, right? He's going to undouble them, and then he's going to have the two bishops and probably a big center to boot. So the move here, I think we're going to recommend it, is to retreat the bishop.
Yeah, now we're going to play bishop e7. And see, it's like we saw in the previous chapter, we want to play like a queen's gambit position. See, our pieces are in the same places. I mean, when we play the queen's gambit as black, we play d5, e6, bishop e7, knight f6. But let's take a look at white's pieces. Well, a3,
it's a mess.
Yeah, it's like a mess. I mean, but yeah, now he played f3. He has to continue his story and play e4, right?
Yeah. This looks like a really good idea. You know, it looks like he's building that big mass of pawns in the center. But I think we reviewed this in the previous chapter, where okay, you know, we can say, all right, white, you built a massive pawn chain, a massive pawn wall in the center, but there's a proven methods for black on how to stop this and how to make a stand in the center and actually poke some serious holes into that pawn wall that white is trying to build.
So yeah, after e4, we take, f takes e4, and now I think we saw this before, this e5.
It's a must. It's absolutely critical. I mean, if you don't play this move,
right,
like knight d7 or whatever else, I mean, white's going to play e5 and you're going to make him look good, right? We don't want to make our opponent look good like, you know, he's played this genius plan. I mean, really, it's not a genius plan, and by playing e5, we're poking some serious holes into it.
Right, now, yeah, white cannot take the e5 pawn.
Yeah, let's take a look. What happens if he tries to snatch
Well, we just take the queen. If he takes with the king, then knight g4.
Yeah, I mean, if knight takes, we just take this, and
the e5 pawn is quite weak.
What is he doing, man? No development. These pawns are all scattered. It just looks silly. And if he takes with the king,
then knight g4 should be great, yeah.
I mean, black's got it all. The world's in your hands. I mean, you're threatening f2. You're going to get the e5 pawn back with some serious interest. I mean, let's say he tries to guard it. We don't even have to take it. Maybe knight c6. This pawn's going to drop. Black has a humongous advantage. I mean, it's a horrible position for white.
It is. So after e5, well, the best move for white is d5.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if knight f3, we're going to see also pretty similar, I think. You know, maybe you can just snatch it. And even here, we can see that white has a lot of space, but, you know, you got to take that with a grain of
in
salt.
The center, and here I don't think e5 is a threat. We can simply castle, and after e5 go knight g4.
Just look at these dark squares, man.
Yeah,
this is a nightmare. The dark squares, I mean, you're going to blockade it. You can just throw a knight on e5 in the future, and you're going to have a guaranteed edge. So after d5, you know, at least he's got space. At least white's got space.
And now we take our chance, and we play bishop to c5.
Very important to jam it in right away.
Yeah, so otherwise he'll play b4, and you know, I mean, I think it's our chance.
Yeah, if castles b4, a5, you're trying to undermine it, but rook b1, it just, you know, this is not what we want. I mean, we don't want to let white establish this huge pawn center and keep pushing us back.
And the point after bishop c5 is, you know, he can try b4 now, and now we can consider bishop d4. Also, if we are careful, bishop takes c1 as well.
This can make sense sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
It's worth considering. Here, I don't think it's really necessary.
No, we can play bishop d4
Yeah,
instead.
I mean, look at the bishop on d4, man. This is the best piece on the board, no doubt.
And knight g4 is coming as well. Knight takes c4, even better, yeah.
This is a really great example of how to play against a loose play from your opponent.
Right.
I mean, black, you know, you don't have to take him on head on, but you pick your spots. You can really poke some big holes in this position.
So here white goes knight to f3,
stopping bishop d4.
Right. And by the way, here we are tempted to play knight g4, but
I consider it.
Yeah, we consider knight g4. But the thing is, you know, white can play something like b4 here, and if we go knight to f2, then the queen goes somewhere. We take the rook on h1, he takes our bishop on c5, and then the knight on h1 is dead. So actually we are losing material here.
Yeah, white is going to get two pieces. For the rook, he got black's best piece, the bishop on c5. This is really bad.
It has a massive pawn structure at queenset, right? Like bishop e3.
Yeah, this is terrible for black.
It is. So
knight g4, it's worth looking at. You know, we got the active bishop on c5. You know, always look at this kind of stuff in your variations, but I think that quick calculation there it shows just not quite going to work out tactically.
So what we're going to play is bishop to c4. Say that bishop on c8 wasn't doing much, and the knight on f3 is very important. Actually, it's controlling the d4 square.
I think the basis of this line, we've poked a hole with e5.
And d4, right? Yeah.
And now the bishop on c5 is our best piece, but it's a delicate piece, right? So, I mean, you know, we got to... What I mean by delicate is we got to watch out. I mean, b4 is really hanging in the air. So with bishop g4, we get rid of one of our more difficult pieces to develop, and we also get rid of one of white's best pieces, the knight on f3, which is kind of playing against the bishop on c5.
So after bishop c4, white goes bishop d3. By the way, we have to see that the bishop on d3 is like a tall pawn, right? e4, d5, and c4 not helping much.
Hideous. Bishop. It's a hideous bishop.
Yeah. So after bishop d3, we play knight b d7.
No worried about b5. No worries at all. The bishop is just going to sneak right in at d4.
And then one day a5 and knight c5 may come as well.
The bishop is just a rock. I mean, even sometimes c5, just to cement that bishop. You know, b4 really isn't doing anything here but weakening white's position.
Right, so white goes h3. We take that knight, otherwise bishop h5, c4 may be annoying.
Yeah, I mean here, you know, doesn't really look that fun. maybe you're just giving a little bit too much space to white.
Right.
The knight, I'm sure, is eventually going to find a nice home on f5. So, you know, just keep it simple, right? The kiss method, just snatch the knight.
Yeah, bishop takes, queen takes.
Yeah, pawn takes, huge positional error. Knight h5, and these dark squares, especially f4. I mean, this is too easy for black.
This would be great for us. So yeah, after queen takes. Well, here we're following Anand's game, and here he played c6, which is interesting.
I like c6.
Yeah, we are like putting pressure in the center. Queen b6 may appear one day, and yeah, of course we need to castle as well. But I feel there's no rush yet, and I think that, you know, if white wants to castle queenside, I'm not sure that's safe for white. Well, he cannot castle kingside. And if he goes bishop e3, which looks great, I mean at first sight, we just take that bishop, and then the remaining bishop, which is bishop d3, is not great at all, right? And
this is, you know, it couldn't be more clear, this example of a bad bishop, right? And you know, black's knights are eventually going to get in the game. They're going to find some outposts on f4, d4, or c5, and meanwhile, white's bishop is a horrible piece. I mean, really, just, you know, one incredibly easy strategy, just to illustrate the point. Black could literally try to trade off every piece on the board, leaving a knight and the bishop, and he's almost got a guaranteed winning endgame, just because of how bad white's bishop is. All of his pawns on the white squares, the bishop just has no future.
So yeah, after c6, white plays bishop d2. Looks like an ambitious move, right? I mean, he's not playing bishop e3, which is giving black a very nice endgame. But he goes bishop d2, trying to play b4 perhaps, and then the knight on c3 is protected.
One more thing also just about the c6 move.
Yeah.
We just go back just a little bit into c6 here. You know, it's very instructive how black's playing in this game, because it can be very dangerous, not just psychologically intimidating, but very dangerous downright. When your opponent's got such space advantage, he's making so many big pawn moves in the center. And this is very instructive how black has picked us apart. He's made selected, targeted stands to make holes. And now, you know, you don't want to stop. You don't want to let it up, right? I mean, if black castles, every move in the opening is at a high premium. You know, especially in this type of position where it's relatively open, right? I mean, maybe if the position's really closed, as we've seen in other sections of the Nimzo, that's okay. But, you know, here, I think that every move is really at a premium. We got to be careful that white is not going to just bulldoze us with all these pawn moves. And so I think the move c6 really just shows that you got to be fighting every single move to really rip it apart and try to get the most out of the opening for black.
So yeah, after bishop d2, we castle here. And then white plays rook c1. Here, you know, it's clear that he wants to play b4.
Probably c5 as well, right? I mean,
right.
That's a lot of pawns.
And then that is why black plays the bishop to d4. Interesting, you know. Now
this is a sneaky move.
Yeah, now it's like we want to play knight to c5. Knight e2 is not possible because the b2 pawn is hanging. And it's now, you know, what I like about the black's position, you know, white's king, we don't find a nice square for that king, right? So,
it's going to be stuck in the center, and you know, with c6, black is really trying to break the center open. The king is a big problem.
Right, so white goes ahead and he plays his plan with b4. Then we go a5.
So it's really kind of cool how Anand played this game. You know, it's a very delicate thing. This bishop d4 was trying to play knight c5. It's almost like he baits white into playing b4.
Right.
So now black, from a completely solid foundation, is ready to break the position open into crazy complications. And honestly, as the position further opens, even though white has the two bishops, it's still kind of closed in the center. And as the position continues to open, it's got to favor black because his king is safe. Meanwhile, white's king is going to be stuck in the center basically for the foreseeable future.
So yeah, after a5, white plays knight e2. Looks like, yeah, he's losing a pawn, but we'll see. Bishop b2, rook b1, bishop takes a3, b takes a5, and here, first of all, I love, Anand's move here, which is bishop c5. We don't need to allow, castle here. The king is still on e1, and after rook takes b7, here c takes d5, c takes d5, and here comes a nice positional sacrifice, which is rook takes a5.
This is really impressive.
Yeah.
Rook takes a5. I mean, very thematic. I mean, you see that white's pawns are still on light squares, although the position is open considerably. His bishop is still a really bad piece. I mean, maybe if he could get to c6, that's going to take a lot of time. And this rook takes a5. I mean, you want to talk about a positional exchange sacrifice. This is just dominant.
Right, because bishop d3 is not a great bishop, and if white gives up bishop d2, like bishop takes a5 after queen takes a5, we'll have full control of dark squares.
He can't even do it, right? I mean, this is too crazy because his king. I mean, just look at the dark squares. What happened here?
Yeah, there's no safe square for that king, and well, but if he's not taken, I mean, if he plays anything else, I think that rook a3 is coming, right?
Yeah.
Not to mention queen a8. I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, moves, right?
It just looks so easy to play for black here. This bishop just went crazy, right? I mean, the bishop in the game, we brought it to b4, we brought it back, we brought it up. Now it's made like this tour. It's gone around the world, but it comes back to c5 where it's on this awesome diagonal. And in this position, I don't think we need to go further. I think black has a very solid advantage.
Right.
White has the protected passed pawn on d5, but it's completely blockaded. It's not going anywhere.
As long as the king stays in the center, it's like...
Yeah. This rook is going crazy on the a file, probably queen to a8, bring the other rook into play, and I don't think white is going to be able to last too much longer in this position.
No, it's a very hard middle game to play, with the king there especially.
Yeah, the rook on h1, it's almost like white's down a rook.
It is. So, well, I think this line is very, very good for black. So now let's move to another one, which is, let's move to...
So we just looked at what to play against the f3 line, the early d5. I mean, this is just a super logical move, just to stop white from playing e4. Just a brief recap on the line that we just looked at with the e5 shot. So now we're going to move on. We're going to check out a few other maybe less popular sidelines, but nonetheless, it's good to be prepared. It's good to have, something up your sleeve against these sidelines in case somebody tries to throw you a curveball.
Yeah, so in the main position after bishop b4, well, you may ask, why not queen b3?
This is a very natural idea, right? You defend the knight, you hit the bishop.
Right, but queen b3, if we compare this with chapter 1, which is Capablanca's queen c2, queen b3 is not that great. I mean, looks great because it's attacking our bishop and it's also defending knight c3. But the queen on b3 is like, it's easier to threat. Here knight c6, it's a very nice move. And then, well, this is a famous mistake. If white goes a3, then we can simply play knight takes d4, attacking the queen. And if white goes queen takes b4, then we have knight c2 check, which is winning, right?
So a royal fork, I think is what they call that.
Absolutely.
Forks the whole family.
Yeah, so, right, I mean, after queen b3, the thing is, it's playable, but the queen is...
Knight c6, maybe we can take this a little further. I guess knight f3 would be natural. I think we can even continue with a5 here.
a5, and we can try playing a4.
Say a3, maybe even a4 immediately.
Yeah, after a5, let's say a3, I would strongly consider here, we can also try taking on c3 one day. If he takes with the queen, then a4 comes, and the b3 square is critical,
Yeah.
I mean,
I think this isn't just a nice, really easy example. Say a3, we just jam a4 to scoop a tempo.
And actually we are winning a tempo, and we can play a4 because he played queen b3.
Yeah.
If white's queen is on c2, then I'm not sure if a5 there is a great move. I mean,
yeah, it's not going to be doing so much, and now we got a pleasant.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, maybe now we just snatch the knight, And we could even just jam it in immediately. You know, the ideas with knight e4 is still very good. Basically, the queen b3 line, you're very rarely going to run into this. I think only an inexperienced player is going to throw this at you. And just this quick line that we just showed you here, I think is going to be more than sufficient. It's going to give you a very easy game to play.
Well, there's another move which is a bit, weird as well. You know, c3 right here. Well, actually reminds me of the Catalan, but difference is that usually when white plays the Catalan, he's not playing the knight to c3.
Right, that's usually just, let's say, in this position after e6,
Yeah.
white would just be throwing the g3. Big difference.
Yeah,
right?
because, and if we play something like d5 here, you know, the big difference is that in the Catalan, white is ready to give up the c4 pawn, but then the knight is not on c3 because b5 and b4 may be annoying. In the Catalan, the knight is on b1, so white doesn't care about b5, b4.
Yeah,
But
so
if the
what
knight
do you
is
think?
already on c3, then we can play d5, because then we are letting white play a worse version of the Catalan, right? I mean, after d5, let's say he goes bishop c2, we can simply castle here.
Yeah, don't try to get too greedy and snatch that c4 pawn. This is going to get you into trouble. I think here you're
queen
going to lose a
a4
piece.
Here we lose a piece.
Yeah.
We can simply castle.
This
but
type of check.
if he goes, you know, if he goes knight f3 here after castling, then I can.
I would think about the pawn.
Yeah, I would take it because again the knight is on c3 and that is not great in the Catalan, right? I mean, in some lines yes, but white decides this. I mean, the knight is usually on b1, right? Because knight a3 is an useful move, knight e2 is useful in the Catalan as well. So here, let's say instead of knight f3 he goes, I don't know, c takes d5. I can simply retake and then play c6, a5, knight a6, just like the Morozevich game. I think that
Very
setup
similar.
is great.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
here
easy.
actually we have a lot of setups like rook e8 as well,
Yeah.
c6.
Maybe we can just go through this quickly. Let's say maybe something like rook e8, castles. You might even try to jam the a5 early to anticipate this. And okay,
Well, actually bishop f8 here should
Yeah.
be fine.
Yeah.
Then c6 and knight a6.
yeah.
I think our
just-
position is great.
Maybe just a real quick example, you know, the early c6 and the knight a6, and very similar to the Morozevich example we examined previously.
Yeah, I think this is great. Yeah. So actually c3 again is like you're not gonna run into this quite often.
If you do, honestly, it's not very dangerous, and I think we've covered some good examples on how to react to that. We do have one more sideline we're going to present here, just something someone might throw at you with an early bishop g5. This, actually, you know, I feel like this is one of the most logical sidelines.
Right, because white is like he's playing the queen's gambit. He wants to bring the bishop out before playing e3.
I mean, if he can get it out, and you know, why not? Why not give it a shot?
Right. So here we're gonna play c5. In the Capablanca variation, where white played queen c2 and then he played bishop c5, we also played c5 to punish him. I mean, like, so here it's great to remember or to see that we can use same idea sometimes against bishop c5, c5. c5 is like a great move. And
Bishop
here-
g5 is it's almost like it's kind of off balance. I feel like the c5 move, another really great thing it does, opens the queen up. You know, sometimes you want to, with c5, you're opening the queen up to come to a5.
And
similar
the c5, sometimes the bishop on c5 is hanging as well, you know.
yeah, it's almost similar to some ideas, I think, in the Rogozin variation.
Absolutely.
We open up c5, a queen coming to a5. You know, maybe you could even try, let's just conceptually, let's say, this idea with g5
And yeah, and knight e4,
you know,
yeah.
queen coming to a5, knight to e4.
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
There's a lot of ways to really pile up on the knight, and we can see that the bishop to g5 move, although it seems so natural, you know, every move in the very early parts of the opening especially is at a real premium, and the bishop coming out to g5 so early can kind of set white a little bit off balance here.
So, well, after c5, those are general ideas we can use against this bishop g5, like queen a5, right h6, c5, and knight e4. Those reminds me a bit of the Rogozin defense, as Will said. So, yeah, after c5, white most aggressive idea, or let's say, yeah.
Trying to gain some space.
Yeah, with d5. sounds logical, right? Here we play d6. Yeah, if white takes on the e6 pawn now, I think we can retake in both ways. I would take with the bishop, perhaps winning a tempo, right? Attacking the c4 pawn.
Pawn takes is possible, but it's a little bit sketchy.
Yeah.
You know, this early in the opening, these pawns they feel a little bit loose to me. With bishop takes, you know, even though you do have a backwards pawn on d6.
We can also play knight c6 now, right?
Yeah.
Which wasn't possible before, yeah.
The backwards pawn on d6, really not a big deal, as black has
We
got
are up in development as
way
well.
ahead in
d5
development.
may become a possibility if we are allowed. So, yeah.
Yeah, let's say maybe like e3, we could go h6, you know, even g5 and just bam, d5, and it seems black has achieved, I think, a pretty decent edge here in the opening. It's very easy to play.
So, yeah, after d6, white usually goes e3. He cannot play e4. Well, he can, but then h6 may be annoying. I mean, the e4 pawn is not well protected. The knight c3 is under a pin. And if the bishop gives up this diagonal, or if he goes bishop h4 and c5, I mean, once e4 is played, right? I mean, e4.
It's a big weakness.
Yeah, it's
probably
h6.
just, I think either bishop takes c3 immediately, or just h6.
Yeah,
either,
h6, and then if bishop h4, c5 wins the pawn. Right, and
if he takes...
Yeah, bishop takes.
What else do you want?
Yeah, we have a full control of dark squares. The bishop on f1 is a very tall pawn. Crushing against c4,
yeah,
e5,
the,
e4.
the positional way to continue, I guess, would just be something like queen to c2, and we could just take the knight and...
Well,
I mean,
we
how...
have a very nice endgame, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a dream endgame with these double pawns. Anyway, so you know, this is going to be easy to play for black.
So white goes e3.
A little more conservative here.
Right, we play h6, always a useful move, right?
Always is very useful to kick that bishop, as after bishop to h4, you don't have to do it immediately, but you know that in the future when things start getting a little dicey tactically, we're going to have that instant g5 resource,
of course,
followed by knight e4. It doesn't have to be immediate, but you know, this type of piling up on c3 is very explosive.
So yeah, after bishop h4, here we play bishop takes.
Look at those hideous pawns.
And after b takes, now we close the position as much as we can, since we have the knight pair.
Oh man.
And the bishop pair works well in open positions, not in closed positions like this one. So we play bishop takes c3 and e5. And see, white cannot take en passant here because, well, that is why we play this move order, right? So white cannot open that position, right? Sounds clear.
This pawn structure is one of the ugliest things I've ever seen on a chessboard. White's pawns just, there's no communications. The bishops, two bishops, I mean, this is making the idea of the two bishops just look bad. This position couldn't be easier to play for black.
Right, and remember, we can always, you know,
rub it in.
g5, yeah. And, of course, you know, attack at king side. But we don't have to forget we have, like Will says, a solid foundation, right? I mean, white, for instance, plays queen c2 here. We go queen e7, very solid, right? We can play knight e7 later. And I love this example because it shows how to play this position, right? Knight f3, and here black plays king to d8, which is, it's showing actually that there's no danger. But this is not only a crazy move. I mean, I want to play king c7, the king is safer at queen side, right? And I cannot, I mean, it will take me too much to castle, I mean, by the usual way. I mean, I'm castling by hand here. Let's say king d8, king c7, and the king is too safe there. Whereas at the king side, I'll push c5, you know, I'll try to play h5 later, you know. But I have all the time in the world. I mean, there's no rush. I can play knight e7 as well, knight f8, knight c6. I have so many plans here. And since white cannot open that position, you know, I think my plan is clear. That is why king d8, I like it. For instance, here, white goes knight d2. Well, makes sense.
White's trying to play with the e4 square.
Yeah.
Maybe knight e4. I mean, you know, it's a decent maneuver. It does make sense. The knight on d2 has got some prospects.
And we play king c7. That was our idea. White goes bishop d3. Makes sense. And we can play c5 right now.
Seems like a good time. Honestly, if I was playing white here, I would give up the bishop. I would just stop messing around and give it up. I would just admit.
Yeah.
I would just admit it. I would just give up, man.
Is black can like reload, you know.
He's still got another knight to come. I mean, you want to talk
bishop f1, it's like
pawn structures. You know, white's got a bad bishop. Black has an incredible bishop. I mean, all his pawns on dark squares. So, I think just. I would just give up and just give away the bishop.
No, you know, before playing bishop takes f6, there's another option. If I were white, I would offer a draw. If black denies, then I would play bishop takes f6.
Yeah,
but yeah,
you gotta try. You gotta
try, right? Because here the position gets close, more and more close. Then you're gonna suffer as white a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah,
if white's hungry, you know, he could try bishop d3, but
bishop d3, yeah, but g5, and after bishop c3. Then knight to h5. Well, you know, here again, black has so many possible moves, right? But this is great because one day we'll be able to play f5, and if white plays e4 here, this would be a mistake actually, but it makes sense. I mean, you can face a move like this because it's like stopping f5, right? It's a mistake, but makes sense.
Positionally, it just makes me want to cry myself to sleep. E4 just...
And if we jump to f4, let's say bishop takes, e takes, and see, now we have a very nice square for e5 for a knight of ours.
Half open file to attack with.
And there's no attack for white at, you know, at the queen side. So it's like we play...
That's the big thing, right, about this line.
Here. Yeah, we are only playing...
White is just going to have to defend passively. He can't really...
Until we make a move here, I mean.
Yeah. Also, you know, I mean, white, probably his best move here, I think, is bishop f5. Trying to trade off some pieces.
I don't mind trading pieces here, but also, you know, I can play something like knight c7 here.
I think that's what I'm thinking, yeah.
And then f5, it's, you know, very hard to stop. I mean...
Yeah. And f5 is going to come. The same stuff. I mean, e4 is a better variation here for white. He doesn't have the white square bishop. Again. But we're going to get the knight to an awesome square.
You know, remember the pawns cannot move back, right? And here we are like playing with our knight, hoping that white creates weaknesses like here. And again, the worst that, you know, can happen for black here is, I don't know, a draw. I mean,
basically,
a very close position with no attack at queen side. And I mean, that's the worst, right? But
in this type of position, I mean, it's just miserable to play for white because he doesn't have any chances to win. I mean, black is just going to sit there. You can play 100 moves torturing white the whole time. Okay, if white defends perfectly, yeah, I mean,
okay, well,
maybe he can hold the draw, but I mean, he's going to suffer. He's going to pay for it.
But we have a lot of tries. I mean,
a lot of ideas. I mean, black is the only one would play in this type of position.
We can try, yeah. So that is what I love this system. Remember
the early bishop g5 to strike with
this
c5.
c5. When he plays d5, it's like we wait for the best moment to play bishop takes c3 and e5. We close everything. This king d8 and king c7, which was played by Nigel Short, it's great as well.
It's a cool idea. Very cool idea.
It's a very cool idea, yeah, absolutely.
I like that. So that's going to wrap things up for this chapter on the sidelines here. I mean, we covered quite a few variations in the Nimzo-Indian, but I think it's very clear that in any case, whatever white tries to throw at you, whatever he tries to surprise you with, as long as black replies from a solid foundation, there's going to be absolutely no problem dealing with it.